good morning. Gosh, good afternoon, good morning.
It's sometimes
it is afternoon. I guess it is afternoon. I'm Allison Griffin. I'm a Senior Vice President with Whiteboard Advisors, which is a research and strategic communications firm based out of Washington, D.C. We provide support to growth stage companies. I am actually sitting in for my colleague, Seppy Basili, from the Jack Kent Cooke Foundation. Unfortunately, he was not able to join us for this session, but sends his good wishes, and I, in turn, am thrilled to be here with our panelists this afternoon. Just to get started, we are going to be talking about higher education and how it should become an engine of upward mobility for low and middle income students. I think we have a lot of questions to ask and points to discuss around that concept today. Of course, across all sectors of higher education, institutions are grappling with how best to boost enrollment and also the success of first-generation, low-income, underrepresented student populations, primarily because we want to ensure a successful transition as they move into the workforce and into communities, and first and foremost, because it's the right thing to do from an equity standpoint, and that's first and foremost what's important in this conversation today. Before we get started with this discussion, I would like to have our panelists introduce themselves very briefly by saying their name and where they are currently affiliated, and then to answer one top-line question, which is, what will it take for our nation to get back to a place where the degree will serve as an equalizer of social mobility? So with that, I'm going to start down the line.
Great, and I'll try to model and not just ramble forever. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Eric Waldo. I am the executive director of the Reach Higher initiative, which was started by Michelle Obama during her time at the White House, and now lives at the nonprofit in Washington, D.C., Civic Nation, where we're continuing our work. To answer your question, I think the thing that we actually have to do is, number one, continue to create and build a college-going culture that builds demand, that tells all young people, regardless of your race, your socioeconomic status, where you were born, that college is for you. And it's not just about access, it's about success. And I think number two, on the performance side, the way to actually get there is also making sure that institutions, especially institutes of higher education, are making sure that completion is their goal, yes, and they're focusing on being student-centered and making college, actually making sure colleges are student-ready and not thinking about how students are college-ready.
Hi, everyone. My name is Cristina Gonzalez. I'm the Associate Dean of the College and Director of Programs for Access and Inclusion at Princeton University. So, ditto, I agree. I would say the work that colleges and universities need to do in order to make their campuses student-ready and student-supportive, but also for students from all different socioeconomic, racial, ethnic backgrounds, right? So trying to make sure that we are providing a culture of success and mentorship for all of our students. And then I think the other thing is just a radical investment in education. So we're having these conversations about higher ed, we're having these conversations about tech. We should also be having these conversations about the teacher strikes that are happening and how we can invest in our public education system, not just in terms of our kind of private endeavors, but also in terms of a larger culture around support for public education in this country.
Hello, I'm Nancy Lee Sanchez, and I'm the Executive Director for the Kaplan Educational Foundation, where we focus on transfer from community colleges to highly selective institutions. So to answer your question, to me, is that the college access discussion is often limited to access from high school to four-year to two-year, and oftentimes the discussion is limited to low-income students going into, or first generation and students of color heading in great numbers to community colleges. And then we talk about selectivity and access for those students in a very narrow way. And for us, transfer is the key to getting diverse populations into four-year institutions of all kind, and making sure that students have choice, and that it's really important that we do not think that access to highly selectives and selectives can only occur from high school to that four-year. It should happen, and it needs to happen at the community college level.
Hi, I'm Maurice Sparger. I'm the Chief Operating Officer for the College of Liberal Arts at Purdue University. I have a portfolio that includes undergraduate recruitment, career advancement, academic and career advising, and then our marketing and communication team as well. I think in answer to your question, that part of what we just need to recognize is that all of our students don't come in with the same set of skills and the same set of connections. And part of what that means for certain first-generation students and low-income students is that they don't have the context and they don't have the social connections. And so helping them understand how they can get the most out of college is really important. Helping them understand the why it matters to show up for alumni panels, to meet those people, why it matters to participate in extracurriculars, and to reach out to them when they don't show up and help them understand that it's a part of how they will build their career readiness and be able to leverage the skills and the credentials that they're getting to actually find that upward mobility.
Cool. I'm Nitzan Pelman. I'm the founder of ReUp Education. We partner with universities to re-enroll students that have dropped out of college. And I think I would say, we have been focusing quite a bit on adult learners in the work that we've done over the last couple of years. One of the things that I've noticed is one, there is a trend that we are seeing older students come back to school. So I don't know how many people know, there's 30 million people in this country of some college and no degree, which often means that they have debt and no value for their debt. And the sort of typical thought process that I think people have is that people go to college between 18 and 22, but the average student is sort of like ticking up. And I think at this point, it's like getting closer to 25 or 26. We've been partnering with universities like Western Governors University, where the average student is 34. And so there's this increasingly large population of adult learners who are coming back to school. And I think that college and learning is not a linear process. So it's not just an 18 to 22-year-old experience. It's one that happens in like non-linear ways over the space of a long period of time.
Great. Thank you, everyone, for giving us a preview of the work you do and the issues that you're passionate about. I'm going to start with Eric. Eric, from the work that you have been doing with the Former First Ladies Initiative, Reach Higher, can you talk about not only the efforts that are underway, but the things that you have learned about involving a broader swath of the student population who are academically ready, actually enroll and make their way through college?
Right, so really one of the reasons we started Reach Higher was actually, in fact, Mrs. Obama, who was a Princeton alum, she had the experience of really being a high-performing student, even though she was first generation, right? Neither of her parents went to college. She went to a magnet high school on the south side of Chicago, and Whitney Young, but still, her parents couldn't help her really navigate the college process. She really only applied to 2 schools. And she had a counselor actually told her, I don't know if you're Princeton material. So she actually wasn't necessarily getting the good counseling. She talks about, her older brother had been recruited to play basketball. And so she said, well, I'm smarter than Craig. And if Craig could go to Princeton, I can do it. And so, but she still talks about getting to campus and not being able to navigate that experience, not knowing from as simple as bringing the wrong size sheets to her freshman dorm bed, you need the extra long, to not knowing how to pick classes, right? Having never seen a syllabus before. She ended up picking senior classes her freshman year. She really struggled until she found the freshman or the writing center, the help center, all these places that help folks navigate the process. And our thought here was that there are too many people up there who also are going through this experience but don't have the luck that maybe Mrs. Obama had, even just having an older brother or having parents who, while they didn't go to college, did believe in education, the power of education. I'll give you 2 stats, which I think are the ones we're combating against the most in my daily life. The first is the completion rate, the 6-year college completion rate for first generation and low-income kids. If you're in the bottom income quartile, you have a 9% 6-year college graduation rate. 9%. If you were in the upper income quartile, you have a 55% college graduation rate in 6 years. Still too low in my opinion, but orders of magnitude different, right? So unfortunately today, where you're born, your zip code, and your parents' income is much more predictive of how you're going to be in terms of your post-secondary success. Now, if Mrs. Obama was here, she'd tell you she knew there were plenty of other people in her neighborhood who were just as smart, just as talented, but maybe weren't as lucky. Didn't have a parent who was pushing them to apply. We know so many of the ideas around undermatching and things like that. So Reach Higher is doing a couple of things. Number one, we're trying to build demand. We're trying to make sure young people today see themselves as college material. In the Wall Street Journal poll that came out last September, almost 50% of 18 to 35-year-olds don't think college is worth it. I think about how pernicious a statistic that is in terms of our goals, because I'm not worried. I grew up in Cleveland, so I'll shame Ohio for a second. I'm not worried about the kid from Chagrin Falls or Shaker Heights. Like, they're going to go to college no matter what. Their parents are going to take care of them. I'm worried about the kid who I used to tutor in East Cleveland, at East Tech High School, who, if they somehow hear this message that college isn't for them, or it's too expensive, or I don't think I'm not college material, or I shouldn't be going and thinking of myself as a four-year institution or anything, I'm worried about their life outcomes. So what we've done is we try to do things like build college-going culture through ideas, and this is happening in just 2.5 weeks. We're hosting about 2,000 college signing days in all 50 states around the country in the month of May. Mrs. Obama will be celebrating hers with 7,000 Philadelphia high school seniors in Philly at the Lee Koster Center. And we're so thrilled to do that because when young people see this, when you have a moment where you have signing day, you have thousands of events around the country, we create a social media moment where hashtag college signing day, hashtag better make room is the #1 trending thing in America. And so young people on their Instagram feeds, on their Snap feeds, on their Facebook feeds, whatever they're on looking at their phone, they're seeing messages of going to college for people that look and sound and come from neighborhoods like them. And that's groundbreaking and ground changing. We also want to get people, when they're excited about going to college, to get connected to resources that might make a difference at the margin. So we use the research of folks like Professor Ben Castleman and Lindsay Page, who talk about this nudging technology that can help students on the margin make better decisions. So a young person might get excited about signing day and post their selfie in their college gear, but we then want them to enroll in our free texting program, which currently texts with about 100,000 students in all 50 states, where we're giving them nudges that can be as simple as a dancing Michelle Obama gift to get them excited, to then, hey, you need to fill out your FAFSA form. Hey, you need to, have you filled out your on-campus dorm fees yet? Hey, have you thought about using Khan Academy to get free advice for taking the SAT or ACT? Those are the things that we can do. That's a small example, but we are trying to get people to build that culture so people view themselves as college material, and once they believe they're college material, we want them to then take the steps that we know they need to do to help make sure they actually get to college.
Great, thank you. So, question to follow up with Cristina, based on what you just said, Eric. When you think about getting students to college, and we also talk about the supports that are needed once students are there. And in a recent article that you wrote for Harvard Magazine, you spoke at length about how making admissions more accessible does not ensure equity of access to the resources once you arrive. And so can you talk a little bit about some of the lessons learned from the work that you are implementing at Princeton to support first-generation low-income students once they're on campus?
Absolutely. So first I will say that I believe that gifts are the great key to all student advising and success. It turns out if you send people pictures of puppies, they're much more likely to do what you want them to do. So I agree. So Princeton has undergone a radical demographic shift in the past decade. We went from 7% Pell eligible in 2007 to 22% Pell eligible this year, which is a huge shift, obviously. And we did so through a variety of different access initiatives, making sure that our financial aid program was robust, that there were no holes in it, that we were making sure that we were doing outreach to high schools and neighborhoods that didn't maybe traditionally serve as feeder schools to Princeton, right? That we were having our financial aid officers travel with the admissions counselors so that families knew that Princeton was affordable. Every family who makes less than $65,000 a year has zero parental contribution to Princeton in terms of room, board, tuition, everything, right? We also created more financial access programs in terms of move-in allowances for students who may be coming without any access to credit or any financial capacity when they arrive on campus, right? So there are all these things in terms of access that we did, but we also realized that like when students get to campus, the experience, as Lori was saying, of first-gen low-income students, when they arrive on campus and have access to these different resources and opportunities on campus, that was differential, right? Princeton is at no lack for resources and opportunities. We have internships, we have fellowships, we have writing centers, we have mentors, we have career services, we've got all of the things. But in terms of who was accessing that and how they knew what to do when they got on campus, that's what was different, right? So how do you know what the writing center is if you've never been to a writing center, or if you're the valedictorian of an under-resourced school and all enrichment, academic enrichment opportunities were coded as remedial in your school? How do you know that, in fact, when you get to an elite school, a highly selective school, that those are opportunities for academic opportunity, right? So what we did was we really started to think about these gaps, right? Gaps like navigating the hidden curriculum. connecting with alumni, with mentors, making sure that you're using all of the resources. We tried to make sure that we were addressing the hidden costs of college, right? So things like summer. What happens when half of the students who have access to family who can underwrite the cost of an unpaid summer internship, those students can go off to New York and do an unpaid internship, but students who are coming from first-gen low-income backgrounds, maybe they have to work instead, right? And don't have that same professional development. So we really started to think about those things and created a program, a variety of different policies and programs that were put into place to basically serve as a telephone operator to students, right? To increase sense of belonging on campus and to make sure that students had equity of opportunity once they arrived on campus. And what we found in recent reports by Raj Chetty, can demonstrate this, but Princeton is an engine of social mobility, right? So once students, first-gen low-income students, arrive on campus and graduate, they're graduating at 96, 98% six-year graduation rate, they move on to have access to all of these things. But the question is, when we think about these highly selective elite institutions, how are we also making sure that we're advocating for students who don't necessarily come through that particular pipeline and maybe accessing other forms of college, community college, those kinds of things. So.
Fabulous. Thank you so much. I'm going to actually jump to Lori, then I'll come back to you, Nancy, and we'll wrap up with Nitzan. Lori, Purdue University recently launched a 3-year degree program. Also, there was an announcement, I think, last week that for the 7th year in a row, tuition has been held steady. And I know President Daniels has also launched an innovative finance initiative around income share agreements. So a lot of innovation happening at Purdue. I'm curious to know, what do all these efforts really mean for low-income students? What is the impetus behind the initiatives? Can you talk a little bit more about how those come together?
So I think for Mitch Daniels, value in higher education is really important. Finding ways to make a Purdue education as a land-grant institution open to any student who's eligible is really important to him. So a way to do that was to flatten tuition, to keep tuition the same rate it was 7 years ago. So that's an important piece of it. But as we sort of look across the spectrum and think about what else we could do, how else can you impact the cost? A way to do that was to create 3-year degree paths. So, anybody could have ever done a degree in 3 at Purdue University. A student who had the creativity and the moxie and a little bit of social and cultural context to know that maybe they could do it, could have done it. But what I think Degree in 3 has done for us is it's really leveled that for students. It has opened that opportunity space for any student who comes to Purdue and wants to major in history or English or sociology or anthropology to say, I can do it in 3 years, here's exactly how I can do it in 3 years. It is within my reach, and by the way, students don't have to have AP credit. They don't have to bring in AP credit to be able to do this. And they also can condense their merit and their need-based aid from their 8 semesters into 6 semesters in 2 summers. So they're not leaving any money on the table. So I think all of that is really important. So we had some students, we didn't talk about this until September, but have some of our current freshmen who, for first-year students, we're kind of calling them now. It gets all confusing with what class you are, right? What cohort are you part of? And so we're trying to build that cohort, but we've got about 22 students who weren't even recruited with Degree in 3 on the table who have opted into that from about 7 different academic majors. And we're really excited to see what the incoming fall 2018 class will be and how those students will take advantage of some of the resources that we're building around it, like a learning community for students who are interested in doing that, opportunities that we're creating to bring the students together so that if they're part of a group of students that's going to have a different kind of Purdue experience in those 3 years, that they will meet others who are having that same experience. That if they're going to end up spending a summer on campus to take some of their courses, there will be people that they know and they can access and they can lean on, right? Because I think for students, that peer piece is really important. I tell students in a class that I teach that one of the most important things that they can do is make friends with their classmates, right? So many of them get there and they open their phone and they read their phone until somebody's standing in front of the classroom and then maybe they put it away. Hopefully they put it away, right? But when they start to talk to one another and build those relationships, they build that peer group that's going to serve them in 15 years. Because in those rooms, there's always a future legislator, a future lawyer, a future CEO, a future nonprofit leader, and knowing one another is important too. And so that's a part of it that we're trying to build for them as well.
Fantastic. So it strikes me, just Cristina and Lori, I'm going to get a little provocative here, right? We're going to spice this up a bit. But short of the multi-billion-dollar endowment of Princeton and without the ability to clone Mitch Daniels, right? How do institutions, primarily public institutions, who are serving the majority of our communities across the country, scale and replicate the efforts that you've just talked about? What else is needed to fuel some of that initiative and energy that you all have access to?
Well, I will say we met with a cohort from a state that shall not be named, because I don't know if they want us to name them, not long ago, to talk about our degree and degree programs. It costs nothing to create that, right? It costs the time of the academic advisors to work on those plans and to build those. But to create that opportunity space for students doesn't cost anything. We all have alumni who love our institutions and who want to connect with our students in different kinds of ways. Creating those opportunities is something that all of us can do. So I think the bar for those things can be pretty low.
Yeah, I think, I would echo that. I think one of the biggest, the most impactful sources of socioeconomic mobility is mentorship, right? We're all here at this conference to network and to meet future mentors, right? People, to form our network of people who will help us achieve whatever goals that we have. And that's what we have to figure out how to replicate for our students. Some of the most effective connections that our students are making are at no cost to us, right? It's facilitating those high-touch, one-on-one individual experiences with alumni, with fellow students, with faculty. But I will say that I think that you can't do this without any resources, because it turns out that being on the ground and working with students is a lot of time. And teachers need the time and the resources to be able to do that work on the ground with students. And so I think at the same time that we're talking about how to replicate this without resources, we also need to be talking about how to get our community colleges, our public universities, more funding through public and through political advocacy.
Any other thoughts or responses to what institutions and policymakers might be able to do to replicate and scale some of the things that we've talked about already?
So at this event, we know we've heard from folks like Bridget Burns, who runs the University Innovation Alliance. So in many ways, some of the work has to be about leaders stepping up, whether it's someone like Governor Daniels, or someone like Dan Porterfield at Franklin Marshall, or Eloy Oakley was here earlier with President Michael Crow. We know that it is going to be the state institutions and the community college institutions that are going to help our most vulnerable students get the degrees they need. But we should be learning, institutions need to learn from one another quickly. And I think previously you had institutions working in silos, and maybe they were doing great work in silos, but it was Ohio State's trying to figure it out, and Vassar's trying to figure it out, and Cleveland Community College is trying to figure it out. And the goal here, and what University Innovation Alliance has done, is just one example, is created a cohort model for colleges and predominantly large state universities to come together and say, we're committed towards the same metrics and goals, and we're going to share what's working. We are essentially going to say, hey, you guys can look at my sheet, I can look at yours, and let's figure out, is this predictive analytics program working for you to get better onboarding rates for first-gen students? Is this remediation class working better for you so that kids are actually completing it on time? If you have a great program that's working to help your vulnerable students during winter break or Thanksgiving to have a place to stay, open dining halls, and have a place to eat, that policy shouldn't just live in isolation. We need to be much more, we need to think, and this is a tech conference, we need to think about how to fail and fail quickly and learn much more quickly from our successes. And right now, institutions of education traditionally haven't done that. But I'm thrilled that places like University of Innovation Alliance exist to help us do that.
Well, and today we got, so the American Talent Initiative, which is in partnership with Bloomberg, is a consortium of 100 different highly selective institutions, all of whom have graduation rates over 70%, who made a pact that by 2025, they would increase the amount of first-gen low-income students, I think 50,000 students among their cohorts. So it's about exactly that, right? Getting colleges together to brainstorm and to make commitments with one another.
A consortium model.
I have one other idea that is sort of different in terms of like what we could do on like an on-the-ground level, but it's something I've been thinking a lot about recently, and it's in some ways inspired by some of the work, Eric, you did when you were, in the White House. But we have U.S. News and World Report created an index in 1983, essentially on selectivity. And so universities compete en masse for like who can essentially claim that they are the most selective with their students. And in some ways that also reinforces social hierarchy and limits social mobility in a lot of ways. And then Michael Crow, a number of years ago, came out with a new index, and it was around innovation. And what would it look like if universities competed on innovation? And the university, the alliance that Eric was talking about, that Bridget Burns was representing, like that now is like a new space for universities to like almost in some ways like be one-upping each other on like how could we be doing things differently? Like who is the most interesting in that space? And I've heard Michael Crow at many different events sort of really tout himself and ASU as being like on the top of that, innovator space. So, we've also talked about Raj Chetty's data and how we're noticing more, or how we're actually able to have a metric now more than ever before around looking at social mobility and economic mobility. And the way that he's done that is by looking at IRS data that he's gotten anonymized for the last 30 years, and was able to really look at who came in what income brackets when they started school and where are they 30 years later. And some universities have really shown incredible progress with the students that came from the bottom quartile, and others have made very, very, very little movement. What about if we had a full-fledged index on social mobility or economic mobility that universities really competed with each other around like, I want to be at the top of that list. And we might really then change a lot of practices and policies that I think Lisa, like you really aptly described, that universities would feel far more incentive to care about those things than other things that they're incentivized to care about right now.
I would like to add something to that, especially from the community college to four-year transfer process. And one of the things that I have found in terms of if you go to your local high school today that is underserved, that doesn't have the resources, the reality is that I meet with many deans from highly selective schools who say, look, I'm not even getting applications from these schools. And so let's start there. The application itself is a barrier. And whenever I have discussions with four-year institutions and say, well, what are you doing to help students in those high schools understand what it is that you're looking for, not depend on the two counselors that are serving the entire institution, and what kind of information you're providing to make sure the application itself becomes accessible, and that the student that is completing that application is very clear about what is expected, not that you're making it up, that what are the things that you need to do in the last 3 years to have a viable application. I think that let's start there. The reality is that many of the students are not going to end up with the application that will be taken seriously by many highly selective and many selective four-year institutions. And let me be clear, it's not about the name, although the name is important. If you have a high-need student, that high-need student needs to go to a school, and it's shown through the data, that can fulfill those high needs. The reality is that our students are ending up in schools that are not able to fulfill their high needs. And so it's really, and to add to that, the process of admissions is a complicated process of interviews. It's a complicated process of being able to explain what are your goals. Going back to Lori's point of cultural context, I sit in many high schools and many community colleges, and I ask, what would you write to this, personal statement? The reality is that they just don't have the tools often to be able to fulfill that. And I can support my nieces and nephews as an expert in this. They're going to submit some really good applications that are going to be read or at least sent to committee. So let's start there. Going back to the community college, again, with over 50% of Latinos ending up in community colleges, and that being the entry point and where first generations go there, we talk about meeting the high potential of the low-income first generation high school student. We don't talk about that community college student that just left high school 2 or 3 years ago, or 5 or 7 years ago, right? And so, again, there's another issue that we're not discussing. There is such a void, it's almost like a huge hole as I see it, that we are not addressing, and that I hold four-year colleges fully responsible for providing information, such as the fee waivers. By the way, one final point. When we discuss FAFSA, if you don't discuss CSS profile, you're making a decision for that student. You've made a decision that FAFSA is it. So you have to, meaning only the schools where FAFSA is relevant. So you have to make sure that if you're discussing FAFSA, you're bringing up the point that to apply to schools that have the highest endowments, that are able to really be able to cover your full need,
Right.
are going to require that CSS profile. And if you have seen the CSS profile, it takes me 2.5 hours to complete. So that's another barrier.
I was curious, it sounds like you have a response, because I was going to ask you from the initiative, the Reach Higher initiative, are you working with students, or are you experiencing what Nancy has described with the students that you work with?
Yeah, so 100%. I think, so part of this panel, right, is also about like, how's the deck truly stacked right now? And I think the truth of the matter is, I will posit that most of the people on the stage believe, because of the work we do, that education still is the great equalizer, and we want people to get that, but it's not being distributed equally, right? People are not getting access to that equalizer in the same way. And so the thing that's making me think about this with your story about FAFSA and schools is that right now we know on average you have one school counselor, a high school counselor, for every 482 students. That's the national ratio. The recommended ratio from the American School Counselor Association is one counselor for every 250 students. I still think that's bananas. Now, pick your favorite like fancy public school or your fancy private school, because those are the kids who have spent their parents have spent their whole life making sure they're going to get into Princeton. You know, those families, not only are the ratios one counselor for every 80 students or 25 students, they're paying for, in addition, a private counselor who can be not just thousands of dollars, tens of thousands of dollars, to help them fill out their essay, fill out their applications. And financial need is not the equation here. So the kids who are then most worried about applying to it all, they don't even understand what they're competing against. So I think we have to think about, you know, one of the ways, so that, to answer this in the form of what can we do, you know, you have places like Colorado that have said, we're going to increase counselors. We are going to decrease the ratio. And actually, there was a study that showed that every additional counselor has, I think, like a 10% increase in the likelihood that students are going to apply and complete college. Now, we are currently in an era also where we're seeing the value of counselors around things like mental health and other things. But I would just put out there that school counselors are the resource that is out there that understands this, that their whole job is thinking about helping young people realize their potential and help them get to and through college. And they are this incredible tool that school principals, school superintendents, and district leaders had the least understanding of how to use and deploy. And oftentimes they're doing lunch proctoring duty. They're helping kids get to the bus. They're taking professional development that has nothing to do with doing the job they ought to be doing. So again, we know there are key things we can do. I don't want this to sound insurmountable. You know, if a kid fills out their FAFSA, we have studies that show that they're 7 times more likely to apply to college and to complete their second year of college. So we can do these things. We have to set the data free. We have to put the resources in place for the counselors to do the work. But if we measure it, if we let the data out there and we set the goals, our kids are going to get there.
So where are the challenges in reaching what you're calling for? I mean, it seems like we all agree that the issues that you've raised are current issues that need to be addressed. There's opportunities, obviously, to further engage and embolden school counselors, but what's it going to take us to truly?
So this is my favorite part about, so I spent 8 years in the Obama administration, and there's a law called the Hatch Act. And it prohibits you from talking about politics. I don't have that anymore.
No.
So you know, this is as now it's 2:35 p.m. on the last day of the summit. It's like Jimi Hendrix playing at Woodstock. We can say what we want. People may record it later. And what I'll say is, I mean, education needs to be on the ballot. We all need to vote. You know, our budgets are our values, and folks need to walk into the voting booth and hold their mayor accountable, their school board accountable, their governor accountable to figure out, did you increase or decrease funding for higher ed?
Yes.
Did you increase or decrease funding for early learning? Did you increase or decrease funding for K-12? Are you trying to increase standards or decrease them? Are you making, you know, early childhood comprehensive in your state? Are you making a college promise program available in your state for free community college? It's a pretty simple equation in my perspective, and part of that means more investment, and that means we as citizens, as engaged people of this country, if we do believe that education is valuable and that is the engine of our economy, we need to invest more. And that means we need to ask our leaders, our political leaders, our social life leaders to make that investment. And if they don't, we need to vote them out.
Nice.
their thoughts or responses. It's hard to follow, Eric. And
I think that that's absolutely right. And I think when we start thinking about what we're doing here, that conversation has to be a part of it, right? We sit in conversations about skill building for our students, right? And these kind of new ed tech ventures that are trying to badge people for different skills that they've developed for the workforce. What you're doing with that model is creating two different classes, right? You're creating a class of people who have access to higher ed, a liberal arts education, who have access to critical thinking, who have access to the networks that got everybody in this room here today. And then you're creating a group of people who are going to be workers in a gig economy, right? So we really have to be honest, I think, about what our goal is, and we need to figure out how to replicate a kind of model that we all believe, right? That kind of mentorship model, that high touch, the access to critical thinking, reading and writing skills that make us able to do the jobs that we have. And we have to figure out how to provide that to everybody, right? Not just a kind of skill training workshop.
I want to add something to that, because one of the things that I am observing, and it has been true here in this conference, is a discussion around workforce development. And the workforce development discussion is really being focused around community colleges and how they can be engines of that. It scares me. It scares me because oftentimes then that discussion then limits and takes away from it being also an engine to bring students to all types of four-year institutions. And it becomes, to me, it's kind of like a truly blindsided when we're trying to say, look, for this class, to your point of people, let's really work on skills development. To me, that says, let's work on getting you a skill that's going to get you a job to serve everyone else, that will have the critical thinking skills to lead the way and to be leaders. That's an issue. And so we have to be very careful that certain policies that are being put out and certain thoughts, what are the biases within that? Because if we don't look at that, what is going to happen again, the history of the community college or the history of low-served community college of my teacher coming up to me and saying, you will make a great secretary if you just learn how to type. If we're doing the same thing and saying, well, let's just take a few technology classes and then you can serve the CEO, rather than saying you can be the CEO yourself, and let me show you what are the things that you need to do, both in terms of soft skills and hard skills, and everything else in between, then to me that is the right path to go. So we have to check our biases when we're discussing these things.
I'm glad you brought that up. I'm sorry.
I think that plays into this whole STEM and liberal arts dichotomy, right? This constant push-pull that it's an either-or proposition, which is ridiculous, right? You can do both. You can have a great liberal arts education and a successful career in the tech industry. I have a daughter who's an English major. She works at Reddit, right? You can do those things. You can have a great tech career too, but we need to find balance and we need to stop fighting between the two. Liberal arts needs to do a better job of articulating how it creates career readiness. And we need to make sure that students aren't afraid that if they major in history, where they're going to have a great opportunity to fulfill a passion. And being able to do that will enable them to do better, right? They'll be in a space that they care about, that lights them up, where they're going to work late at night because it's what they want to be doing, can still allow them to find a path to a career. And so we need to do a better job of articulating that. So, there was a Gallup study that came out that they did with Inside Higher Ed that said school admissions directors report that prospective students and parents don't understand the value of a liberal arts education. And we need to fix that, because if we don't, it's exactly what Nancy said. We're going to go back to why the land-grant colleges were created. And we're going to have a population of people who go to four-year higher education institutions, who get liberal arts degrees, and who are going to be the leadership class, and we're going to have a bunch of people who are in community colleges, who are only STEM focused, who do directly skills training, and who aren't prepared to innovate along the way, and it's just going to make things worse.
So you just made a quick reference to Gallup. I'm also aware of some additional work that Gallup has done with the Strata Education Network around U.S. adults reflecting on their higher education experience. And essentially over half of the U.S. adults would say if they had the opportunity to do it all over again, they would actually select a different institution or a different major or a different degree program. And so thinking about that, really putting that in context of individuals who have spent a lot of time and money navigating a system, then they get to their adult years and say, wow, I really would have done something different. I think that is an opportunity for us to think about these pathways in very different, from very different perspectives, and thinking about how the education program is actually aligned in some way with a workforce or labor market outcome. I'm curious your reactions to that statistic, that idea in the context of what we're talking about here.
I'll jump in and say, I think what's so hard about that data point is that, like, how many of us feel like any of the decisions that we made when we were 18 or 20 years old were like the best decisions we've ever made? I don't know how many people watched Monica Lewinsky's TED Talk that she gave, but she actually opened up with that line as well. Like, how many people make like great decisions when they're 20 years old? And I found it actually to be really powerful, because I think like it is easy in hindsight to like say, gosh, like if I only knew that I was really passionate about this instead of that. Like, I think part of the way you figure those things out is you go through a discovery process. And like, what is a safe way to go through discovery so that you can sort of like have like a really like good smorgasbord of opportunities? And I don't think that you're gonna like smosh all of that in between 18 and 22. And so maybe this, we've heard a lot from like the president of Stanford, sort of like, what would it look like if we just like blew up university altogether? And instead of saying like, let's do a 4-year degree between 18 and 22, we said, you could do like 1 year when you're 18 and then go work a little bit and then do another year later on, or do an online class, or like, and we sort of like broke down like what it looks like to get an education and really like pressed on the conventional wisdom or expectations of what we think. And I recognize that that's very hard to do, because there are such clear like nomenclature around like what are the expectations in the society. But as everyone seems increasingly more panicked about the future of work and sort of how these jobs are going away, like maybe this is an opportunity to press against some of those things.
So I believe that liberal arts education and education in critical reading, thinking, writing, problem-solving skills are the things that give you the flexibility to move through a changing workforce, right? I mean, I was a PhD in Victorian literature, and I now work in higher ed administration. I didn't get trained in this, but I did get trained in how to think critically about things, right? And so I think when we think about the privilege that bestows onto us, and the privilege of being in an institution or an environment where we have networks that we can draw on to think about what a kind of career change would look like, or where we could get additional training or skills to be able to develop, that's really the heart of it, right, is that foundation. And I think trying to figure out how to provide more students with that foundation so they can be flexible in a changing job market. We're never going to be able to anticipate all the skills that people are going to need in 10, 15, 20 years. What we can give them are the resources, the kind of foundational opportunity to figure out how they can kind of adjust and change to that changing market.
The only thing I'd say to all of this is that we're obviously focused on the higher ed portion. This is a higher ed panel. But I think that part of the change that we are seeing, which maybe gives me hope, is how do we, and also how do we fix the equity lens here, is how are we pushing higher ed deeper into the K-12 system, right? So now, again, I'm from Ohio, so I was talking about what's going on in Cleveland. But Bard College offers an AA degree at the Bard Early High School in Cleveland, Ohio, and I think they have it in a couple other urban communities as well. And I spoke at a commencement there, and those students are getting a high school degree, but they've been learning from Bard University professors for 4 years, and they're going to get an AA credential. And so they're going to decrease the time it's going to take them to get a 4-year degree. They have the competence now because they worked with professors, they took those classes. And they're hopefully going to decrease the time and the price. So, and that's just one example, right? There are plenty of early college or dual enrollment or these other programs. But again, when we give our students of color, when we give our low-income kids the opportunity, they shine. They're excited about learning more and having that vibrant experience. When we assume that they can't do it and we don't expose them to that, that's when the crime is on all of us. And again, if you care about these things, I encourage you. It's still available. The Federal Department of Education has something called the Office for Civil Rights Database, and you can go on it and you can search the courses made available at different high schools. And again, I'm from Ohio, so I talk about Ohio examples. In Shaker Heights, a nice suburb in Cleveland, at the high school, at Shaker Heights High, there are 36 AP courses offered at Shaker Heights High. If you look at East Tech in East Cleveland, same size high school, there are only 6 AP courses offered. So again, this is what we think about the opportunity gap. So that's the delta that we're trying to overcome. But I do think there are so many more people who now understand if we can push career development, if we can push pathways and higher ed into the K-12 experience so that it's not just this magic moment that, yes, people who are 16, 17, 18, 19 who aren't in a position to make a big financial decision about their lives or a career decision about their lives, if we can give them much more exposure, that's going to help us have much more equity and vibrancy for them and for the economy.
In New York City, I came from the K-12 space before I went into higher ed, and they had created all of these P-Tech schools, and I think they were like brilliant ideas where Microsoft partnered with a school, and they really had their employees coming in and either architecting courses that really were exposing students to what it would mean to work at Microsoft and learn the skills of working at Microsoft. And then my understanding is a 6-year program, so 4 of those years were high school, 2 of those years were at the CUNY system in New York, and if you went through those 6 years, then you would get, I think, an interview with Microsoft. And I think those models are really creative and innovative.
So I think that we've had a good conversation across our group this afternoon about sort of a call to action, further identifying some of the challenges in front of us. And as we wrap up, I'd actually like everyone to just take 1 second and dream a little bit. And if you had a magic wand, which I hope one day we all will, in some sense, and you could use it to wish away one impediment that's currently in the way to advancing this work for low-income and underrepresented students, what's the impediment that you would wish away? Just popcorn.
I would say the exemption of fees for all applications, from transcripts. Those are the things that I would like to wish for, and not for it to be that a foundation like ours has to cover the fees, but that both colleges, 2 years, high schools understand that charging $8, $12, $3 is too much. You cannot have a diversity plan if you are not exempting all fees from low-income students.
Thank you.
A world without fees.
I'm going to do one more, World Without Loans.
Yes.
So, I mean, if you've read Sarah Goldrick-Rab's book on college, financial aid in colleges, one of the #1 reasons that students drop out is because it's just minimal things like their financial aid check came too late, right, for them to be able to enroll in the classes they wanted to that semester. Princeton did away with loans 10 years, 15 years ago at this point, and clearly it's an issue of funding, right? So our public institutions should be able to have the funding that they need to provide no-loan education to students with financial needs.
So I would have 2 things. I'm
2.
going to cheat, right?
Okay.
2. One is I would like to have the magic wand that would make students show up when we do fabulous programming, because many times we bring exceptional people to campus, exceptional contacts, exceptional opportunities to learn things, and I have 8 kids in a room. And so I would love to make students show up. But the other thing that I would say to everybody in this room who is part of higher education is that you can do more faster than you think you can. Deadlines are a beautiful thing. And so, it was the first week of May. We had sort of 12 programs, 12 plans that were mapped out for degree in 3. And because of a story on the NBC Nightly News, Mitch Daniels got lit up. And by July 1st, we had 22. We built an entire brand strategy and advanced that brand, and we're ready for a kickoff at the beginning of the school year. You can do more than you think you can, and it doesn't all have to take 2 years at a university.
I would just say, and just as maybe kick it down into the K-12 space, my magic wand moment for how to fix all these things is paying teachers a lot more money so that we recruit the incredible people to actually inspire, train, and get these kids ready. So, I want starting teachers to make salaries that are competitive with whatever a first-year consultant or engineer is going to make, and a teacher should be able to make 6-figure salaries. I think it's the most important profession out there, but we don't treat it as such. You know, we want the best trained brain surgeon or cancer doctor for our parents or for ourselves, but these teachers are the ones operating on our young people's minds for their entire lives. And we want the best trained people, and we want the people who are the most talented. And they're actually inspiring and helping our young people. And the idea that we don't pay that workforce or reward them in our society the way we should, I think is bananas.
Alice and I have sort of talked a little bit about this over the last couple of days, but I've just been thinking a lot more about the power of networks. 80% of jobs posted on LinkedIn are filled through referrals, which just tells us what we already know, which is that who you know matters a ton. And if you do not have access to somebody who has a network who's going to make an introduction to you and open a door for you, you might just be like, at best, like a nice, resume on a very large stack of paper. And so I've just been playing around with an idea of like, what would it look like if we democratized networks and asked people that had very robust networks to add one more person into your network who would really benefit from you in making more introductions on their behalf.
Great. Well, if you would join me in thanking our panel, appreciate all of you doing so.